chair, and that's me. My name is Elliot Thompson. Committee members today on hand: Bob Perkins, Mark Siegenthaler, Richard Reston, Stetson, sorry, and myself, Elliot Thompson. So this is a special meeting of the Harbor Committee, and the topic is the Lyman Morris project for dock expansion. I think it'd be appropriate now for Jeremy to offer some comments and share with us why we're here today.
Sure. And you talked about this briefly at the last Harbor Committee, and I came in towards the end. There were some questions about the review process and what needed to happen. So I had gone back through the code and the changes that were approved by voters last November and made the determination that what was needed was to come back through the Harbor Committee under Chapter 108, Section 28, which is for land attached floats and other structures. Harbor Committee did review this prior when it was on a different path, although it's still on that path going to the planning board. The planning board continued last Thursday, continued this project to June 6th to keep it going so they don't have to re-advertise and notice that that hearing. Harbor Committee during that process was asked to provide the Chapter 290, which is the zoning code, requires the Harbor Committee to provide comments. It says they shall provide comments to the planning board, but those are general comments. It was not under the provisions of 108-28 of the Harbor Code. So the Harbor Committee did provide comments to the planning board. We did a site visit with the Harbor Committee, did a site visit with the planning board at the same time. So it kind of got a little convoluted. We are sorry about that. I know it puts a little delay in this. But we did everything possible to get this special meeting scheduled within a week of my memo that went out to everyone last week. So thanks to the Harbor Committee for meeting so promptly. From here, again, the Harbor Committee reviews this under 108-28, and then it goes to the Select Board. The Harbor Committee does not approve the project. They provide comments to the written comments to the planning board, to the Select Board. So it'll scheduled to go to the Select Board tentatively for June 4th. So if it gets through this process with the Harbor Committee and the Harbor Committee can get comments to us next week, we can include those in the packet that will go to the Select Board for June 4th. And then once it gets through the planning or the Select Board, it will go back to the planning board on June 6th. Does that help, Elliot?
Yes, that's a good start, Jeremy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm confused.
Okay.
In our comments that we made, April 19th, it refers to 108-28.
Mm-hmm.
So we reviewed it under that process. So why are we?
I don't believe you did review it under that process, but
Well, you weren't here. We were.
I wasn't here, Mark. You're right.
April 19th, our comments here, 108-28A.
Do not have a, I will, okay, you want to go down that road, you can, but what you were asked to provide was comments to the planning board, not to the Select Board. What needs to happen is comments need to go through this process and get from you to the Select Board, and then it will go to the planning board.
This is addressed to the Camden Planning Board, Camden Town Planner, and the Select Board.
Okay.
All right, you received a copy of this. Planning Board received a copy of it. Ethan. So what confuses me is you asked us to review this initially, and we're very selective about the information that we received. All right, we didn't have much information to go on at all. So we spelled that out in our comments that were requested.
When you say you didn't have any information, what does that mean?
We didn't know if this was a full application. We didn't know if this was a a change in the original.
If you go back to,
application.
if you go back to the memo that I sent prior, this goes back probably 2 months ago. I did not reference 10828 at all. I referenced chapter 290, which required you guys to provide just comments. And I specifically said it wasn't under 108 in that prior memo. So, we can
But it is
nitpick and go down and go through this if you want, but what needs to happen is, and if those comments are the exact same comments you have today, then so be it, and we'll move those through that process like that. But this is required. We did not go through it under 10828. Although you say you may have reviewed it under 10828, what we requested and the planning board needed was just comments, not under 10828. So.
Bob?
Yeah, I think that Mark's comments are an appropriate topic separate from this morning. I think what we have here is a mulligan. When we were talking about it before, it was confusing about what are we doing? What's the process? What are the standards? And I didn't feel like I had a very coherent understanding of what we were doing and what was applicable. And now that's been clarified. And I think we ought to just, yes, we have background because we've been out there and seen it a couple of months ago. But we've got everything. We now know exactly what we're addressing, what standards, et cetera. And I just soon do that. And if we have process questions about, how the application was presented and whether we had a clear mission, we can talk about that outside of this process, because I just don't see that that's going to gain as much when we should be focused on what it is that the applicant's requesting.
Okay. Jeremy, I got the impression from our recent communications over the past week that the Section 108 document that we have been using, was not current. And I and others were informed that after there was an election, November 23, and past week, there's been an update to that 108.
Right. So I will say that there was all of our codes are in a code. And then when they get approved, when changes get approved by voters, there has been a lag in sometimes as much as a year by the time those changes actually get put into the codified into the code. I will say that as of yesterday, Janice has worked with General Code, and now they're going to update those November and June, at the end of every November and every June. So what you do find today, if you went to the code online, you would find chapter 108, but above that chapter 108 of what is the code, there's a little section that says new laws. It doesn't specifically reference chapter 108, but those are the new laws for 108 that were approved in November. So I get stuck on that sometimes. And I think probably consultants do sometimes, and probably lay regular everyday folks reading the code get confused by it. So what I did for you, Elliot, and the Harbor Committee was I took the changes that showed up in those new laws that were approved by voters, and I merged them into the relevant sections that you would review. And that's what is at the end of your packet. There's some highlights in yellow, which I had included are the relevant sections for the review. And then you also have the red strikeouts, and the blue is the new changes that were included.
Okay, so Harbor Committee members, I'm from Jeremy's response, it's my understanding that the code has changed from when we made our comments on April 19th.
I'm not sure the code has changed. Our understanding of the code may have changed.
Right. And the applicability of the code changed. That's how I see it.
Okay. So let's explain what changed.
Land attached floats were not regulated prior to this. They are regulated now, and they are included in 10827, which says no mobile, and this is what requires a permit, no mobile vessel hoists, piers, wharves, bulkheads, breakwaters, marine railways, land attached floats, or other structure shall be constructed, enlarged, or improved except upon approval and issuance of a permit in accordance with 10828 of the Harbor Rules and Regulations. So we added land attached floats to that section that was never in there before. Application section 10828 includes land attached floats. And then there's a new G on what the applicant has to submit, which is the location of proposed moorings and other associated infrastructure for land attached floats. And keep in mind that these changes did go through a harbor committee a year ago, and I think the land attached float definition was hashed out by the harbor committee at that time. But does that help, Elliot?
Yes, yes, thank you, thank you. And
And there were some other minor changes, sorry, in the review criteria, which is section B. Number 5, previously it said substantially block, and this is about the outer harbor and coastal harbor, that the project will not substantially block or interfere with public rights of passage and uses of the shores and flats. That was substantially was changed to adversely, and interfere, we added substantially was included before interfere.
this question is for the harbor.
That would be 10828 6B.
I have a copy of that for me.
I don't have a copy of it. I can get you a copy of it. It was all sent to you guys, so you should have had it already. But I can go make a copy of it if you'd like.
That's just part of it.
Right, but that's what I was trying to look at, substantially, blah, blah, blah.
So a question for the harbor committee members. Is it our understanding that standards by which we are to review the project, the standards changed?
From when?
From before we received these communications and from Jeremy?
Yeah, we were not discussing whenever the last electoral change, elected vote changes occurred, we were not factoring that language in, I don't think. So the stuff that we just talked about of substantially was changed to adversely block, or it's hard in the light, substantially interfere. That language, I don't think, was the language we were looking at. But honestly, I just feel like this process has been confusing, and I just soon, like I say, have a mulligan and have the applicant make their pitch. And if we end up having the same reactions, then so be it. But I think it further confuses the process to try to parse out. So what did we think back in March? What did we write in April? We've got a chance to go at it and just plain do it right.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Jeremy?
Yeah.
You, just yesterday, perhaps, within the last couple of days, you sent out a submittal from Gartley Dorsey.
Yeah.
And that, I just noticed the number of pages were about half of the pages that relevant to this project that the planning board received.
Yeah.
Why is that we get half of the pages that the planning board got?
Well, maybe we should ask the applicant. Will can come up to the table too, but I think what Will was doing in this packet was providing the required materials for this review. I think is the answer for that. You want to care to comment on that, Will?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The planning board has a whole long list
Right.
of submission
Right.
items that the committee doesn't have. And so the planning board gets a lot of additional information, tax maps, properties within 200 feet of there's a whole long list that is in the site plan review ordinance.
And different approval criteria that they address the approval criteria in their submittals too. And they do that for the planning board. They did that in this packet, and they went down through the approval criteria in 10828 specifically to address the comments that you need to review this under.
Okay. Harbor Committee, is it our consensus that we need to redo our comments?
Yes, that's what I'd say. I'd have also additional questions.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I'm just trying, what I'd like to do is try to establish what the process for what we want to accomplish. And part of that is to review the submittals and the scope of work. And of course, we've gone over this before and know pretty much what the scope is, but we do have information that we didn't have before. And then following that, we look at the ordinance and the changes to the ordinance and follow the procedure described therein. I think we probably will have questions for the applicant. I have questions today. And consider the responses to those questions and then prepare our comments.
Right. And it may be that we end up, my memory of our comments was that we had a lot of questions about process that are no longer going to have to be in comments, but we may end up substantively saying the same stuff. But I think that it could be more focused and that we ought to focus on what questions we have today and what we're told today.
Well, I think, speaking of process, all right, I think we ought to clarify one issue. Are you aware of this? Well, that the harbor ordinance states that the process is it goes from the harbor committee to the select board to the planning board. In the zoning ordinance, it states it goes from the harbor committee to the planning board to the select board. So that's where this whole process has gotten a little bit convoluted. And I would think it would be appropriate to clarify which process we want to proceed with. And my suggestion is that it go from the harbor committee to the planning board to the select board. And the reason for that is that way it meets the standards of the harbor committee, then it meets the standards of the planning board, and then the select board makes a ruling on it. If it goes to the select board before the planning board, they're not aware of whether it meets the zoning ordinance, zoning requirements.
Let me comment on this. The approvals that were changed last November clarified this. In chapter 108, chapter 290, the zoning code doesn't send anything back to the select board. What the process is, so the review and comments of the harbor committee shall be in writing, shall specifically address the standards in Article 6, 10828, and shall state the reasons for the comments and shall be forwarded to the select board for its review and action. The new section 4 that was approved by voters last year says, upon receipt of the review and comments of the harbor committee, the select board, after a public hearing, shall either approve with conditions, or deny the proposed project in accordance with the standards of Article 6, 10828 of these harbor rules and regulations. The select board decision shall be forwarded to the planning board for the final review phase. The planning board shall then review the proposal pursuant to the requirements of Chapter 290 and issue its written decision to approve with conditions, or deny the application. No permit shall be issued unless approved by both the select board and the planning board. After final written decision by the planning board, if the application is approved by both select board and the planning board, a permit shall be issued by the code officer. If either of the planning board or select board do not approve the application, the applicant may appeal the decision of the Knox County Superior Court pursuant to Rule 80B. So within 30 days. So it is very clear this is an issue that the select board had previously, and the harbor committee had talked about it, what was the process. So we clarified that last November, and it's very clear that it goes from the harbor committee to the select board and then to the planning board. There is no going to the select board and then no going to the planning board and then the select board for final review. That's not how it was approved by voters. That is not the process.
Okay, perfect. So that's clear.
Yep, it's very clear. We clarified that last year because it was It was very unclear. Yeah.
Okay, good. So we have the process down.
Wow.
That's progress in the Harbor Committee. Okay. I have questions, as I imagine the other committee members do also. Questions for the applicant.
Well, do we want to do those during the presentation or before? Well, I would assume that the applicant would be given a chance to go through this stuff.
Normally, Elliot, what the applicant generally does is gives a brief presentation of the project, and then you would have an opportunity to ask questions. So I think that's probably the best path moving forward.
Please will.
And that's that one section is the G, and Will and I had talked about this just the other day. And that is in 10828A1, there's a new G. It does say, and this is what's required in their application. It states that a location of proposed moorings and other
The question I had in looking at the aerial photo, there are existing floats will be running off of those floats? Okay.
I'd like to clarify something here. You say that the ordinance prescribes submittals for the planning board, but not the Harbor Committee?
Oh, well, it does though, which is section 1 of the application. That's why you added the floats, the location of the moorings today. Just to clarify. What's required is A through G, and Will's provided A through G in the application materials.
regarding the Army Corps, in the packet that was submitted to the planning board, there was a response from someone at the Army Corps, I believe. As part of that response was documentation of the previous application, perhaps in 2019.
I think it's
In that document, is mentioned dredging. Is there a plan to dredge? Mention? Power pedestals. And that's not shown on the layout here, and I'm not going to use there. But here in the list of submittals for the Harbor Committee, it says a plan showing location and type of lighting. Are those pedestals illuminated?
they are.
Correct.
Is that right? And there are going to be power pedestals. How many pedestals are going to be on these four proposed floats?
I don't know.
The electrician tell us how many it could accommodate, but 2 per float would be the minimum, I would say. Ideally more.
So possibly 8 pedestals.
Yes. It's not at all. We dismantle our electrical every winter anyway, so that's a pretty normal procedure.
How high and bright is a pedestal for those of us who don't have any idea?
There's a cut sheet. Those are.
Sits down on the float.
And the ones that are currently installed down off there, when are those illuminated?
At night.
I imagine this isn't related to Harbor Committee business, but I'm curious about the disassembly and reassembly of a power circuit on a floating dock. What town authority oversees that?
They would need an electrical permit from our office, and the code officer, who's the electrical inspector, does an inspection. And they will need a flood hazard permit for that stuff too, because it's minor development in the flood zone. So there are electrical standards in place for areas in the flood zone.
Okay. And part of the submittal that was provided to the planning board for their meeting in their packet last week was a letter, a memo from Matthew Wolf, dated April 4th. And Matthew listed a dozen questions that he had about the scope of work. Were there responses made to his memo?
And broad review, initial review, and I think that's what that is. The planning board has approval criteria. And so some of the questions I will say that Matt asked may not be really pertinent to some of their approval criteria. And that's, I think that'll be hashed out at the planning board meeting. But again, there are specific standards that an applicant has to meet and that the planning board reviews under. They can't veer far from those standards and those evaluation criteria. So because someone may have an issue with something, if it's not listed as an evaluation standard of the planning board, it's really off limits. Although the board has a right to ask the question and the applicant can answer it. They can address their concerns and back in the submittal if they feel like it is appropriate, but it may not be an evaluation standard by the planning board. And I think that's the case with most of Mr. Wolf's comments. I think they're appropriate comments and thoughtful. Nothing wrong with the comments. But I think, does that make sense on the review of those?
Thank you
Yeah.
for your explanation. So Lyman Morris at the June 6th meeting of the planning board, then would that be when
Yeah.
you'd offer the verbal response to Matthew's questions?
We understand the project at this point, and we should go down through the standards and
Yes.
determine that they meet all the standards.
And Will did provide comments on how he believes that the standards are met for your benefit there in your
So
review.
these are standards for the outer harbor.
Correct. That's what's
So-
highlighted there, Mark.
Mark, would you lead us through a review? I'm interested in identification of the applicable standards.
Okay, let's just go right down through them. Outer harbor and coastal harbor. Number one. Project will not interfere with or pose a hazard to navigational channels between the inner harbor and the bay and from the public vessel ramp to the main channel.
Can you cite, can you define that in the code? 10820,
It's 108.28.6B1. And there are 9 in that list, but really only 6 that are really applicable. That's meant to meet Steamboat Landing. Right.
So, discussion on that?
I don't think it interferes more than a whole lot of other things would. When you look at I'm looking at the aerial photo that's got the eelgrass. And yeah, I could see that someone could be navigating around that float and get on the edge of the channel where it's somewhat thin, but when you look at how the channel goes right up along the Lyman Morris docks, there's more interference further on than there would be there. I mean, just getting in and out of the gas dock can make you coordinate with people. So when one is talking about the navigational channels, that's different from where boats might go. That's a specific, marked out area.
Okay.
It will increase traffic. There will be an increase in traffic. We have some questions from the public here. Yes.
Ron Huck. To the south over the years. And there's not even close to where it's to where it should be as described in Harbor Ordinance. So I think in order to determine whether or not we have a conflict with the navigable channel, we need to establish that the channels, if it were where it was described, is described in the Harbor Ordinance, so we know that, we don't have any way of knowing whether there is a conflict.
But do you have any information that in the area of these flow? I know your basic point is that you go out, there's a line, and it should be here or there.
So there's only one place it should be, and that's how it's described in the ordinance.
Correct. Where is it? The question.
So it's where I think the channel is described in the ordinance.
Compared to how it's shown here.
Because I know where the channel is. It's not.
Your opinion is on the corner here where these floats are. All the way back here and should be closer to the floats than it's shown. That's what I'm asking.
No, I think it's more than likely closer. I mean, if this dotted line that we're looking at here is supposed to be representative of where the channel is supposed to be, which it isn't, but so I think that's what needs to be clarified. That's all I'm saying. I mean, you guys, everybody can make a decision. In fact, it probably, if we're
Four, right now, 108-4.
the yacht. On the inner ledges off Northeast Point. Northeast Point they're referring to is what we call Sherman's Point. And it refers to a beacon. So it's not the beacon that's on Sherman's Point because that's lit. It's the day beacon. It does not have a light on it.
But
So
that
it's
would
the-
appear, you're talking about this, what I would say is the southern side of the navigation.
It is,
channel.
exactly. It's supposed to be the southern side of the channel. The channel's supposed to be 75 feet wide. That channel is supposed
Correct?
they are. It's the black side.
Thank Steve Fixley, do you have any comment on that?
Yes. The way the ordinance is described is the way that Jim French, when I took over 24 years ago, said, here's the channel. Now, in the 24 years I've been harbor master, up until about 2 years ago, we had the same inspector, Tim Galvin. And there's moorings that have been in place and not been moved. And believe me, Tim will come and confirm this, because sometimes I would say, hey, let's tweak this 5 feet. And, oh, you can't do that. Mr. Smith has been there since 1956, and it's unfair to move his mooring. So the moorings haven't moved along the channel since 1950, basically. So, and that's because people are very specific on where their moorings are. So in my mind, the mooring show where the channel has always been. So I'm not sure where Ron's getting his information from, but I do know that the only thing that was a little weird is when GPS, that technology came about, the Rockland station had a group of people that wanted to actually put on a GPS chart where the channel was. And Ben Elson will come in and tell you that when they did this, they kind of made a mistake and they shifted the channel so their GPS line shows the channel in a different area. And it was obvious because you could see a picture from an aerial photograph, and there's the channel where there's no boats, and there's the 2 orange lines that they have. Obviously, they'd made a mistake. We contacted them to see if they would fix it. That group had left, and no one was kind of excited to make that change. That's the only reason I would think that it looks like the channel has been shifted.
I'd like Will to address Ron is referring to in some ordinance having been described a certain way? That I don't know.
I don't know that answer either.
I don't believe so.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, if I may. In point of fact, the whether it coincides with how the channel.
I get Ron's questions, and I guess what I'll work on, and maybe with Steve, and we can work with Army Corps, is to make sure let's figure out what the intent of this channel. I mean, I read this section of channels, right? This is for the passage of any vessel to and from the inner harbor to the ocean shall be as follows. I think we should try to figure out for November if we need to clarify this or change this based on what Army Corps has for the channel and what we need for, egress and ingress out of the harbor. And we can bring that, if we need to change it, we'll plan to change that in November, going to voters.
And the existing town defined channel is 75 feet wide.
In the ordinance.
75.
Right.
And Will was just saying that the depiction here is 150 feet wide.
you have any comments to add to these, to what Ron and Steve have discussed? Have the channel markers as defined in the ordinance been, are they depicted on any of your drawings or views? That
The town.
As to where I got my information. I don't know if he's questioning the credibility or what, but I got my harbor ordinance.
from,
Harbor ordinance.
oh,
That's where I got in the harbor ordinance. Personal observation. So just to answer that question, so that this, that I don't know what, I don't have credible basis for my opinion.
So. Google Maps. That's a picture of it.
Yeah, I have it laid out on a plotter. I can show you, but it's described as with the you would take a course past the can, and that would bring you to a point that when you intersected the channel as it's described in the ordinance would be, that is 1,500 feet from the southeast corner. So it was all meticulously laid out. When that ordinance was given out.
Clarify that moving forward. I guess the real question is for the review of the Harbor Committee is does this project interfere with or pose a hazard to the navigational channels between the inner harbor and the bay from the public vessel ramp to the main channel? That's, I mean, I think the applicant demonstrated.
So as far as procedure goes, should we make a motion on each one of these?
no.
No.
Discussion,
We
and
have an issue between us, we can come back to making motions about that, but I think it's easier to move along. I'll just say, as clarified, and I'm not saying that Ron's issue about where is the official ordinance channel shouldn't be clarified, but in terms of this project, I don't see it being an issue in terms of point number one, because I don't think that term they use.
Interfere with
Interfere with.
or pose a hazard
I
to.
think that Elliot mentioned it'll increase traffic. I don't know if that's entirely true. It might increase traffic right at this point versus a different point, but I'm not sure how many extra boats it has going through the channel. Or the question more is, if someone's using these floats that don't exist now, is that going to interfere with the other people who are traveling the channel?
In the review processes I've been involved with, we've always gone through each one and we make a motion, and then at the end, we make the motion that it meets the standards.
Okay.
So, I mean, that just
okay, Mark, then we'll follow.
clarified, keeps
Follow
everything
the
clear.
process as you described.
So
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion that the project does not interfere with or pose a hazard to navigation channels between the inner harbor and the bay and from the public vessel ramp to the main channel.
Second.
All those in favor? Any discussion, any further discussion about this? You're in the microphone.
Ramiro de Acevedo Ramos. I own the Schooner Surprise and the Sloop Benjica. I am a heavy user of the channel, so I can tell you that I've been sailing in and out of the harbor for 25 years. Heavily in the last 10 with the Surprise and Benjica for about 8. I know that the channel hasn't moved in the last 10 years at least because we know in and out. So it hasn't moved in 10 years. Also, I had a chance to review the plans of these floats, and I personally last week, coming in with the boat, I checked and see if these floats were interfere with the traffic in the channel, and I don't believe so. So it's actually pretty clear that it's to the right. Also, I think by having those floats in there, provides some sort of a barrier to that area where I believe there's no boat should be in there. Every summer, we have to call on the radio boats that actually made mistakes in trying to cut the corner and going through that area, which is very shallow. So that will help boaters not to go in that area. And just while I'm here, because sorry, I had to go to work. Also, these floats, I know this is not the point right now, but I just want to say this and very briefly. These floats also provide a big help for boaters in distress. Lyman Morris for us is a big asset for our business because anytime we have an emergency or times we need to hold the boat out quick, which happens a couple of times in the last few years, they're always there. And by having those floats in there next to the travel lift, it will help the process. And any other boaters that actually in distress in the bay will have sort of a safe, open spot there to be able to like haul out quickly. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramito. Okay, 3-0.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, moving on to B6.
Okay, will not substantially eliminate or interfere with existing or designated moorings and anchorage areas and access thereto.
And then the applicant did provide some information on how he how they believe they meet that standard, just so you have that.
I would have one question on that. Just again, looking at the aerial photo, there's one mooring boat. Bend, and what's the distance between that and the end of the float?
Casual observation, looks like it's about the length of the floats.
Exactly.
Yes. The 4 floats, about the same. 120 feet or something? Something like that.
So Steve Pixley, any moorings have to be replaced?
Need to be just moved like 8 feet. Alex Cohen's boat, twin boys, but I don't think it does. I don't think it does.
I've forgotten, are boats swinging into both sides of this float or just the west side?
Larger boats will be on the east.
So their response to this area is not an area suitable for moorings due to the shallow water depths and close proximity to the travel lift pier. Proposed floats will provide another location for tying up Camden residents and visitor dock dinghies.
Well, I think we have the word substantially in there, in two.
Mhm.
Areas for the access to.
I'll second that. All those in further discussion, further talk?
I just have slight, I remember at the steamboat landing, there's a mooring that looks perfectly fine until it's dead low water and the wind's from the wrong direction, and then you could almost step on the boat from there. So this might, in fact, sometimes be closer, but I guess I'd go back to substantially and think that it doesn't meet that standard.
All those in favor? 3-0. Moving on to B3.
Three, will not substantially reduce or interfere with existing shellfish and clamming areas and access thereto.
I'd move that it doesn't.
I don't think you can clam there anyways, can you?
We have a moratorium on clamming currently.
Yeah.
Indefinitely.
I don't know about that word, but
It's been on for 2 years now.
yeah.
Uh-huh. And what's your outlook on clamming in that area?
I've never seen a clam in that area.
Says that this will not substantially reduce or interfere with existing shellfish or clamming areas and access thereto.
So when you guys make the comments for the select board, we'll make sure that you'll identify that there are no clams in the area per Pixley.
He hasn't seen any.
Okay.
So Mark, you moved it, I'll second it. Yeah.
Okay. All those in favor? Moving on to 3, substantially reduce,
Number 4, Elliot.
Yes. Number 4, interfere with public vessel launching and pier facilities.
I'd
Doesn't
move
appear.
that it doesn't.
Uh-huh.
Second.
Okay, any discussion on launching interference? All those in favor? 3-0. 5, substantially block or interfere with public rights of passage and uses of the shores and flats.
Let's, the new language there, in the November amendments were adversely block or substantially interfere with public rights or passage and uses of the shore and flats.
I'd move that it doesn't, basically. This is out beyond that. And if it's interfering, the travel lift, et cetera, has already done its thing.
Second.
Any further discussion there? All those in favor? 3. Mark, would you proceed, read the,
Adversely affect small recreational boating activities to a substantial degree.
This one I have to comment on, that before there was steamboat landing, I had to row my little rowboat from Outer Harbor mooring into the public landing area, and it wasn't that short a row, and especially on a hot day, and I would cut that corner as tight as I could. And there's no question that if you were small boating around this corner, it does push you further out, whether that's substantially interfering. On a hot day in July, I would have said, yep. But whether that's an objective opinion is something else.
And,
I'd make a motion that it does not substantially affect small recreational boating.
Adversely affect small recreational boating to substantial. Yep.
Okay. I'll second that motion.
You got a question, a comment over there, Elliot?
Mr. Gold, Stephen Gold, please identify yourself.
it makes it difficult.
To comment on this the way you're doing it, piece by piece. But first off, I would say, just looking at the project, it's as if we're talking about, it's presented as a bunch of floats. In fact, this is a substantial extension of a pier, and with new information provided today, with 2 power and light stanchions per float, this is in fact a marina. And it's going to be loaded with boats. And when you look at the impact of it, it's not going to be 6 or 8 foot wide floats. It's going to be floats with boats anywhere from 12 to 18 feet wide on either side of this thing. It's going to be a substantial intrusion into the harbor. And basically, the harbor is public space. That's the public domain, the outer harbor. And to give it over to a private company, I believe is wrong. And there are several problems with its incursion into the outer harbor. It congests boat traffic in a very busy part of the harbor, including the channel area. Lyman Morris has admitted that they would use these floats for transient or permanent dockage. Given the shallow water close to the shore, most of these boats would be backing away from these floats into the busiest area of the harbor, including the channel. Many community members enjoy kayaking, paddleboarding, and rowing around the perimeter of the harbor. These floats would force them into the busiest part of the harbor, exacerbating the safety issue. The plan doesn't show the harbor line in that area. However, I'm sure this proposal would extend the floats far beyond what any pier would be allowed. We have recently written new rules trying to eliminate or shorten piers in the outer harbor. This combination of floats basically makes this a pier that's 325 feet long, where the current restriction is 150 feet. There's also a question of the law passed a few years ago that gave Lyman Morris an exemption on extending a float. That law, I believe, refers to a float, not 4 floats. The idea that this is necessary as an emergency thing for a launch boat defies the way boats are launched. Boats are lowered into the straps until the water intakes are underwater. Then the motor is started while still in the control of the straps. If the motor doesn't start, a decision is made whether to haul it back out or tow it to another location. It would never be left afloat. These floats would not be needed for emergency launching procedures. And as to Ramiro's comment about how convenient this would be if a boat got in trouble out there, the truth of the matter is the floats are going to be covered with transient dockage boats or permanent dockage boats. So that doesn't prove to be a factor. I don't think that we should be giving up the town's rights and ownership for the purpose of this project, because for another reason is there is no hardship to Lyman Morse that warrants this project. Thank you.
Okay, our item discussion was adversely affect small recreation.
Harbor Committee to review, the review and comments of the Harbor Committee shall be in writing. So it's the comments, the review and the comments shall be in writing. I think going into great detail about comments from everybody that provides comments in those comments to the select board is probably not wholly appropriate. I think you can tell the select board in your comments that there were comments made. I assume Mr. Gold will likely be at the select board meeting and at the planning board meeting to review and to comment on their review as well. So I really think keeping your comments to the approval criteria is probably the most appropriate thing to do. Again, you're not reviewing based on, Steve might have some very good points, but your comments should really be left to the standards that you're reviewing it under, and go from there. It's my opinion on that.
Well, I would just say that being an owner of many boats in distress, it's nice having a dock to be able to lay on when you're in trouble. But anyways, I have just your first page of this. Do you have the second page, which would have your comments past number 4?
There's 5.
Yeah, just read that.
I guess all I want I don't think we need to list comments that are not on these points.
Right.
It's our comments, and there's a Zoom record, I assume, of the meeting and what people said. And essentially, there's a redo at the select board anyway. We're just expressing our opinions today and providing, advice and questions. And the select board is the rubber meets the road stop. I think that in terms of interfering or substantially interfering, maybe there's a balancing of the need or the benefits from this versus the interference from Bob rowing his rowboat around the corner. But do we need to get into that level of detail?
But I think the weight of this is based on the motion that we make and vote on. And we make that motion based on the public comments we hear.
Also, like, I think we have a motion on the floor on 6 about small recreational boats. Did we have a motion and a second on it?
We did, yes.
Then I guess I'd say let's vote on it.
Item 6, adversely affect small recreational boating activities to a substantial degree. We had, Mark made a motion, I seconded. All those who approve? 3. Number B7, construction of approved projects shall commence. Jeremy, can you?
Yeah,
speak to this?
I can just read this. I mean, it's an odd thing to include something like this in kind of approval should be somewhere else, but this section talks about construction of approved projects shall commence within 1 year of the date of the approval by the select board and should be completed within 2 years of the date of issuance of the building permit. So that's really a process issue. And as I understand, they're ready to move forward well before within 1 year.
Yeah, that's not.
Right. Go ahead.
And 9 is also not really a approval criteria.
Yes.
Correct.
7 is just basically irrelevant.
Right. Agreed. And
I move that number 7 is irrelevant.
Okay, not relevant to our discussions.
So I move number 8 is deleted.
8 is deleted. Yes, there you go. Second that deletion. And then 9 is a
9
maintenance
is
one.
also not relevant.
Okay. Okay, so those are the standards here described in 120, 10,
10828.
28.
So
This needs a motion, but I just want to, I asked Will up front about whether the existing road boats and stuff that these are attaching to actually exist. Because I think that the language of the exemption from the float sizes is not all that great, because I'm not sure what an extension of an existing dock system means. It doesn't really mean that anything that protrudes from but the fact that this is a place where there are already floats located and this is attached to the satisfies my interpretation of an existing dock system. But if there had been nothing there and it was just popping off of the travel lift, I wouldn't call that a dock system.
And this standard that Bob's referring to, this is really kind of the development kind of criteria, kind of development standards on widths and things like that. This isn't really relevant to approval criteria.
Except that it's in there, and if you didn't have the last part, it would be no further conversation, because these floats would not be satisfying that. But
And this is 108-30. This is where the harbor master has to approve in writing of these floats, which he's done.
Yeah, it's already done. But I do want to comment on the fact that, you know, whenever you try to maximize a resource or an asset, you are going to add a different dimension of needed management. And, you know, throughout the years, looking at the team at Lemon and Morris, you know, I know they're up for the task. Yes, I mean, Steve Gold made some points that are true. I mean, it's busy area, but it's not like it's Bob made the comment. It's not like you go another 100 feet. It's even busier than this. And we know, and I think we take pride, how to make it work. You know, when we did the dredge in 2002, we designed the inner harbor floats to be tighter, and we added 4 more floats. And at one point, I remember when we were designing it, someone in the dredge committee said, "Well, isn't that too packed? I mean, someone who can't drive a boat, they'll have trouble." And I remember I said, "I'm not designing a harbor for folks that can't drive boats. I'm designing a harbor for folks that can drive boats." And I know you're going to have people that don't, but usually you can see them a mile away, and there's always help that comes. So that's what I wanted to point out.
Okay, shall we move on to 108-30?
108-30 I included in there for you just because that's what
procedurally, we should make a motion that this application meets the standards under 108-28 6B 1 through 9.
I'll second it. Because he was saying should, and I think he meant make that motion.
I do make.
And then the comments coming from you to the select board would state that. And that you find that it meets those evaluation standards, meets those standards. You don't formally make an approval of the project. You're providing comments to the select board, and then they'll review it.
Okay, discussion about that motion. Is this the complete set of standards by which we evaluate the project?
Yes.
Everything listed here.
Yeah. And then just so you know, the select board uses those same exact standards during their review. Again, like Will said, the planning board has more standards and different standards. Likely that's where lighting will come up more at that meeting, at the planning board meeting. Because there's a standard for lighting that the planning board has.
And the exemption for length is under the zoning ordinance. Is that correct? It's not in the harbor ordinance. Or am I confused there?
No, I think it's in the harbor ordinance. 12830, which you just read. Municipal piers, municipal launching ramps, and extension of existing. The Harbor Committee can come together with it. Get a memo to the select board, to the town manager's office for the select board meeting on June 4th. So if I could have comments from the Harbor Committee by, I don't know, day on the 30th, if possible.
I would suggest that our comments are basically limited to the fact that we conducted the review.
Correct.
Met the standards. We don't have to talk and fluff.
Agreed.
But we should probably note any of the people, public members who actually spoke and expressed opinions here, but we don't have to go into all of the details. It's on Zoom. But basically, our comments are simply that we reviewed them.
And that you felt that it meets those
Right.
standards. Yep.
I don't think it needs a lot of narrative.
Nope. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Elliot, does that work?
Yeah, I'm considering it.
Okay.
All right. Well, Elliot considers, let me just point this out. This was from the town warrant. Town voted at the June 17, 2017 annual meeting and approved Article 4. It reads, shall the town vote to amend the Harbor and Waterway Ordinance, Article 5.1, Section 8B4, which would permit the extension of the Lyman Morris existing float system in the outer harbor by adding the following underlying language to the existing text. Okay, so it's clear that the town voted to approve this in 2017. So,
To approve the language.
in the town warrant, it specifies that, but it doesn't really show it in the ordinance. It describes it in the ordinance, but it doesn't state that it was a town vote specifically addressing the extension of this project, which it was.
What changed?
We can get into too much legal stuff.
Yeah.
But the rationale or what a legislator says is the purpose of a bill doesn't actually count. It's the language of the bill. So that would be the introductory language. The purpose of this change is to do such and such. And then the change reads as it reads. And I would also say that, honestly, I could care less whether this was approved. If it was officially approved in 2017 or 19, but not built, that approval expires and it's considered by the authorities existing today under the laws as today.
But what
No, they didn't vote to approve the project.
right, they voted to amend the ordinance to facilitate a project like this.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, that refers to items B, 10830, B1 and 2.
Yeah.
B1 and 2 address a float, the float, not multiple floats. And nowhere in the ordinance have I seen any comments about a string of floats.
Well, yeah, I mean, number 4. Dock systems for commercial marinas.
Yeah.
Which is multiple floats. It's,
I didn't read the language as intending to be limited to that there's a float. It's talking about the size of any given float, not whether you could only have 1 or 3 or 6. Because
Well, I
I think
think,
there's lots of docks that have more than 1 float attached.
I think 1 and 2 are very explicit about what they're addressing.
well, they are, but 4 is just as explicit.
Right.
And one and 2 is for residential and 4 is for commercial.
And municipal, yeah.
I struggled with this too, Elliot. And, you know, I went through the same thing and 4 is very explicit.
Well,
But
I think it covers it today.
You do, Elliot.
I
I think you're referring to 30 right now. I think your review's limited to 10828 and you've
I think we've done it.
addressed all of those and I think we're good.
Good job. Okay, and as far as drafting the document, how should we proceed with that?
Draft it.
I guess it'd be pretty simple.
Yeah.
Well, I'll do that.
Thank you.
And send something out for you to review and comment on. And together we'll finalize that. Yep. Okay. So that conclude our business here today.
Thank you,
Guys.
Elliot. Greatly appreciate it.